Hello, everyone. I am Yuri Limana from the International Youth United, your moderator for the OpenGov Digital Youth Summit session on advocating for freedom of information during the pandemic. This session is organized by the International Youth United and the Youth Alliance for Freedom of Information. Next slide, please. For our session today, this will be a brainstorming session. We will be hearing not only from our speakers about the situation in their countries when it comes to accessing government information amid the pandemic, but also from you, our participants. Next slide. Basically, what we will be doing here is to spark up conversations and exchange ideas on how the youth can use our respective governments' COVID-19 responses to improve upon the freedom of information advocacy. Without further ado, let us start with our first speaker, Ms. Mieko Onesmo Kisanga from Cyprus.
Hello, my name is Mkiako and I'm happy to be here. So Yuri, should I just continue with answering the questions or you're going to ask me the questions first?
So basically, what you what we'll be doing is to share the context in Cyprus when it comes to accessing government information during the time of the pandemic in Cyprus.
Okay, so I'm in the Republic of Cyprus. The ongoing situation currently is pretty vague and still there's no information efficacy up to date. It is difficult to access information and that is the appropriate information and often it's limited to statistics. The links are minimal and often evaluating the statistics as compared to how you can protect yourself. Most of the information regarding COVID-19 is usually accessed through the television broadcasting, which most people don't really have and then cannot afford, which again, these updates are minimal and they're usually repetitive. Once in a week or more, and they're in Greek, which is to say the information is not really properly disseminated accurately to half of the population at hold and who aren't familiarized with the language. And again, it is momentally based on geographical mapping of the most affected areas as opposed to steps to be taken to prevent yourself or to protect yourself from the virus. And another problem that I've noticed around the country is there are no leaflets or brochures given around to educate the mass on what's really happening. The health institutes to take the test is also vague and it's still unknown to people. And there's always a back and forth movement of going to one hospital to another clinic and where exactly to get tested and if there's money to be paid. So it's always a back and forth movement where when you go to one area, they'll tell you go to another place. And when you go to the other place, they'll drive you back to the other place. So it's sort of like the staff of the hospital also not sure what they're supposed to do. And also the residents and the citizens are not sure where they need to go. Do we have the right of information in the country? Yes, we do have the law. And it is law number 184 and section number 1, which was implemented recently, 3 years ago, back in 2017. Are there policies which are helping to upload the freedom of information? I'm not so sure. I tried to check it, but currently there's nothing so far. Hopefully, hoping that in the future on, there'll be more. What are the things we can basically do when it comes to implementing freedom of information in the country? I gathered my thoughts and I was like, okay, first we need to eliminate the digital divide within the country. Not many residents and citizens have access to internet nor technology. And most that do have tend to have technophobia and some do need digital literacy. By doing so, we alert the population that there's many problems and there's a proper problem and this problem needs to sort of be taken care of. Second, letting the residents know that there's a law that supports their right to freedom of information and it needs to be implemented. So apart from just having the law in the books, this right also needs to be implemented. This will indeed exercise the voice and lead to citizen participation. Once they know that, okay, I have the right to information, I need to exercise my right and I need to know the information within the government and within the nation. So this will help citizens participate more into social, economical, and political matters. Third, and the last, is eliminating the media restrictions that we have within the country. and making it easy for citizens and experts to display the appropriate information, not only wrong information, but the appropriate information without fear of their lives or fear of being tracking down. And this makes sure that it's different to this, and making sure that the information also that they're going to be provided with in different dialects and languages, because we know a nation is composed with different people from different backgrounds and different cultures and also different languages. So it's appropriate if you have a list of different languages in which a person can clearly understand. We do have a lot of bilinguals, but most of the bilinguals do tend to know one language more better than the other. So if you have a variety of languages, you can sort of change a perception on how a person can understand a sentence or a word or a page. And thank you.
Thank you for that, Miyako. Those are insightful points that you made there. You raised the issue of accessibility as well as inclusivity, and that's a great point that you've made there, regarding the, having the information presented in different languages. And when it comes to public government information, especially in the time of the pandemic, there's a need for information to be more accessible to the public, and it's crucial to tackle the coronavirus pandemic. And next we have Mr. Francois Kos from the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. So firstly, the access to government information throughout the pandemic in the Netherlands. During the initial outbreak of the pandemic, Dutch government response was almost non-existent, so cases were not that high, people didn't really know what was going on, so the government felt like it did not have to do so much. However, in recent months, as the situation has gotten really bad here in the Netherlands, the government has set up a weekly video conference with media presence. And during this media conference, the Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, speaks about the current situation of the coronavirus, as well as what he plans to do in the future. So he will say, for example, cases have been up a lot this week. These are the policies that we want to implement and the new regulations that we want to use. And basically, he explains his reasoning for whichever policies he wants to use. During these conferences, there is also the option for the public to ask questions to the Prime Minister in case he has not been in depth enough during his conversation. So they could say, what about the businesses? How are the businesses going to be helped? Or any kind of question like that. In terms of the laws here, so do we have the rights to information and the freedom to information? The exact laws concerning this area were updated in 2018 with a document called in Dutch Wet Openbaarheid van Bestuur. This translates to English as the Law for Transparency of Governance. I think first, before I go into it, it's important to explain a certain definition in this paper. And this is a definition of a document. This is a written piece containing government information of any kind. In terms of the public access to such documents, anyone can request such a document at any time and does not have to provide their reason for doing so. So they simply have to set up a meeting with the municipality and they will be given whichever document they want. There are, however, some exceptions to them actually getting this document, which are, first one, would this document endanger the crown or the state? And would this document potentially endanger individuals? As for improvements that I can propose, I think that they would be quite similar to the previous one in Cyprus. In the Netherlands, we have quite a small population, I think 17 million right now, and 3 million of those are non-Dutch or of non-Dutch origin. Most of the documents provided by the government are in Dutch, and they do not really offer any kind of translation, so you would have to look at that through your own accord. So similarly to Cyprus, I would say having more translated documents would be very helpful for everyone in the public to gain government information.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing the situation in the Netherlands, Francois. Truly, the Netherlands remains to be one of the model countries in terms of the framework and implementation of FOI. It's great that you do not have to provide the reasons for obtaining information, and that it is accessible both electronically and in paper. But it's a great point. It's a great point that you have made there regarding the to have more translated documents. And given now that we are now in the age wherein um wherein the nation states are no longer form of a single nation. We are form of different nations nowadays, and to make it more accessible, make government information accessible, translating this documents would really help people. And thank you for that again, Francois. Next, we have Mr. Vino Lucero from the Philippines.
Okay, hello everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for that transition, Yuri, and thank you so much, Ikyaku and Francois, for sharing the situation in your countries. So, just a quick note before I share the situation here in the Philippines. Yeah, just a reminder for our participants in this room to add the number one or two in your name in case you haven't, so that we can assign you to a breakout session. And for those who want to share about the situation when it comes to right to information or freedom of information in your country, especially during the time of the pandemic, please feel free to raise your hand or mention it in the chat box so we can give you time after my part to actually speak during the session, as this is a brainstorm session. So we reserve some time to hear your insights about the situations in your country. Okay, so for the Philippines, yeah, of course we have issues. It's nice that we have daily bulletins from the Department of Health when it comes to the basic statistics when it comes to the COVID-19 cases. But of course, the question is about quality and accessibility. So of course, in the past, there's been issues when it comes to the consistency and quality of the data being shared. So in the past few months, there's been times wherein they change the terms or the labels they use, and then it causes quite a confusion, especially if you're monitoring it, because they're changing the definitions and then the scope and limitation of the terms as well. So it was quite hard for, especially for civil society actors or and organizations to track and help out when it comes to relief efforts, given that the definitions are changing. And of course, when it comes to accessibility, so given the pandemic and given that most government agencies in the Philippines still has some difficulty when it comes to providing digital copies of documents and data requested via FOI via an FOI request. Some of those FOI requests were not responded to during the lockdown. So as you all probably know, Philippines has one of the longest, if not the longest, lockdowns. Actually, we are in still in an ongoing sort of lockdown. So mobility is very, very limited. And yeah, accessibility and mobility is definitely an issue. And of course, when you take it to another level, where aside from the basic COVID-19 information, you look at, take for example, how the government is spending uh, taxpayers' money when it comes to responding to the pandemic, you actually get into another hurdle when it comes to access to information. Of course, given the emergency procurement or contracting being done, some agencies are slow to upload their contracting or bidding documents and other information regarding public procurement to the central database wherein civil society organizations and the public can check it out. So there is quite a difficulty on that. And of course, especially when it comes to transparency in other government processes during the time of the pandemic, we're facing quite difficulty on that as well. And of course, it kind of reflects as well to the priorities of the government. So, in instead of making the government focus solely at the pandemic, we encountered a lot of FOI or freedom of expression related issues during the past months. So take for example in the Philippines, you know, a lot of the people from the regions or from the provinces, they don't have access to internet. So they rely instead to radio stations and TV stations. So recently, the government shut down and declined giving a franchise to one of the biggest broadcast networks in the Philippines, ABS-CBN. So at this point, it is difficult for those, especially from the regions who only have access to news coming from the old stations, radio stations, and TV stations of ABS-CBN. They're not able to access the same kind of information anymore, given that ABS-CBN is not allowed to broadcast anymore. There has been a law as well wherein the government passed about anti-terrorism. But when you take a look at it, the fine details of the law, it can be abused to attack human rights advocates, activists, or those just simply expressing constructive criticism or dissent to the government. So instead of putting all the energy towards addressing the pandemic here in the Philippines, it seems like um, our government and several of its branches actually have different priorities. So just recently, in the recent weeks, the House of Representatives in the Philippines had another uh, struggle as to who will retain the speakership of the House. So instead of focusing their energy in addressing the issue of the pandemic, they played politics. So it actually kind of translates to how the Philippines is faring when it comes to addressing the pandemic. As you probably know, we are in the top 20 of the highest total COVID-19 cases. And being a small country, that's actually surprising. And yeah, we're still in the middle of some sort of a lockdown, and it seems we're pretty far when it comes to fully flattening the curve, but we're making some little progresses, to be fair to the government. But it seems like this situation will last longer than expected for the Philippines. So yeah, that's it for my part. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you for sharing what we are experiencing in the Philippines, Vino. Indeed, there are a lot of misplaced priorities, and rather than increasing the reach of crucial, relevant information about COVID 19, the Philippine Congress even shut down a national broadcasting station. And at this juncture, we would like to hear now from our participants. So we will be divided into two groups for our breakout sessions. You will be assigned in the breakout room you have designated beside your name. For our first breakout segment, we would like to know your ideas about how can the youth use information and context from the COVID-19 pandemic to spark conversations on improving access to information with the government. And for our second breakout segment, how can the youth spark multi-sector collaborations on advocating for FOI during the pandemic? All right. You will be assigned depending on the number you've put at the start of your name. All right. Let's hear from our participants about their situation in their countries when it comes to COVID-19, in terms of their government responses to COVID-19, as we wait for our um, technical team to organize us in our breakout rooms.
Hello, technical team here. People that chose Breakout Room 1 can stay in this room, and those who were in Breakout Room 2 can move over. They should have received an invitation already.
All right. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. So all of us here are for the breakout room number one. What we'll be discussing here is how can the youth use information and context from the COVID-19 pandemic to spark conversations on improving access to information with the government. And we have here also Francois Kos from the Netherlands here with me to mm, to guide you in our breakout room. All right, for our discussion, and so basically what we want to work on is the action points on what the youth can do to learn from the COVID-19 response of their governments and to initiate further discussions on the freedom of information advocacy and even improve upon um, the right to know laws in your respective countries. So feel free to unmute yourself for sharing your ideas with us. As I can see, we have 28 in our breakout room number one. Right, anyone who wants to share their ideas, and feel free to unmute yourself for our discussion. Hi, Eric Okello from Uganda. So you can unmute yourself if you want to share your idea, your thoughts on basically how we can use our experience during the COVID-19 pandemic to improve upon access to information with the government. All right, Kimberly Mieko is here with us.
Sorry, I went to the first session. Okay, let's
All right.
continue.
All right. Anyone who wants to share first? So, for example, in the Philippines, right now, we do have an executive order. That's the executive order number made by the president implementing freedom of information in the executive agencies of the Philippines. And right now, they have because of the pandemic, there were instead of the 15 working days um, transaction, it would be up to 30 days transaction when it comes to obtaining government information. And one of the things I believe that we can improve upon on freedom of information in the Philippines is to really make it into a law, because executive orders are not the same as statutes, which can not easily be overridden by the succeeding president. So, come the 2022 election, if the next president of the Philippines would think that freedom of information is not necessary in the bureaucracy, it's easy for him to overhaul it. So, basically, what we would need in the Philippines would be to make it into a law. Do you face the same kind of issues in your countries? Do you have
Yeah, I'd
anyone
like to hear
from?
from many people we have. I feel like we have many countries here. Maybe I should
Good
point
day.
it out to make it more
Good day.
fun. Hello,
Yeah.
I think there's someone speaking.
Yes,
Okay.
Miss
Good
Henry.
day. Um, okay, so I'm Kendi Obinyali from Nigeria.
Okay, continue.
Okay, so I feel can you hear me clearly?
Yes, you're audible, Kehinde.
Okay. So I feel COVID-19 is has been a general virus around the whole world and affecting us in different and in Nigeria, even though we have the freedom of information passed into law, but it really has not taken effectiveness in all states. That's not states of the federation. So we have a problem of accountability, questioning the government. And yes, I could say for a fact that we have independent organizations and non-governmental organizations that push to try to get in infecting this. I just want to take out of the suggestion from to talk saying that I feel one of the ways to
Hello, Kehinde, are you still there? I cannot hear him.
Right. We'll get back to you, Kahinde. We actually
Mm-hmm.
have here from the United Kingdom, Haley. She said that in the UK, the COVID-19 situation has made the general public more familiar with statistics and data. However, it has also been easier to misunderstand the data, and there's a lot of fake news. They have a program in the UK called Youth Against Misinformation, where young people are taking action against fake information and advocating for access to accurate and easy to understand data and evidence. That's
Mm-hmm.
actually a great point that Haley made, because data shouldn't be a hindrance when you're trying to access government information. And I think the youth can advocate for more accessible, presentable, easy to understand government information.
True. Mm-hmm. Let's
All right.
hear from someone else. Maybe Lois Luna. Mm, okay. Anybody else wants to put in what their country is facing and how to advocate for freedom of information?
Is anyone here from Pakistan or from India or
Okay, hello, good morning.
Hello, Francisca.
hi?
Yeah, this is Francisca from Nigeria. So I think different countries have peculiar issues, especially how they try to track what the government is doing during the pandemic. Like one issue we have in Nigeria is data, like trying to have data to know who needs what services that need to be provided at this time. We can't effectively say that if you're following what's happening in Nigeria, there've been some kind of youth protest, and also recently we've had a lot of poor people on the street trying to uh, take loot what the government was meant to give them in terms of food and palliative during the lockdown. That is clearly reflective of a lot of things that has gone wrong in terms of the data management that would have been used to provide distribution of those palliatives. Though that's still not an excuse, but it tells you that there's a deep-rooted problem in terms of planning for the citizens. And at times like this, no one has envisaged that there was going to be a pandemic. So countries that are not thinking critically about using data for national planning should be able to learn from our own experience, and we hopefully from our own civil society engagement. One of my conversation my organization is looking to drive is how can we effectively gather data that supports the poor in what they call it, situations that we found ourselves. So I don't know what it is like other countries that are currently managing COVID. How have you, I'll also throw the question back, maybe that will also encourage more people to talk. In terms of supporting vulnerable people during the pandemic, like the situation we currently have in Nigeria, where food that were meant to be given to the poor and vulnerable didn't get to them when they were supposed to get it. So how are other countries also managing this situation? To help, if you can share experience, how government is also supported and how civil society is helping to track that. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca. And essentially, just want to share with you, in the Philippines, basically, the data is being shared online and through the news. And before the pandemic, there were programs by organizations and the private sector using government information to actually benefit society, which you actually pointed out, how to effectively gather data and support the poor, particularly. In the Philippines, there's a program wherein there's an app which was made using government information to track down schools being built throughout the country to ensure that there's no corruption. So that's just one of the things that government access to government information can do.
And Jury, there's also a chat from Sheena Adams. She says, in South Africa, we have a strong regulatory environment and mechanisms like the Promotion of Access to Information Act, but it requires significant legal and monetary resources to yield this law effectively. This leaves a big chunk of population out who can't use the law without the necessary financial resources. That's really true. And we also have Danielle Drake. I'm currently in Nepal, and the government gave out food supplies in the first lockdown, but people needed proper government ID, which many people did not have the proper ID to receive the aid. This is also a barrier in most countries. So NGOs and neighbors had to step in. And I feel like that's what we face in many countries, where it's the private organization stepping in as compared to the government organizations, which is sort of a big problem.
Yes, basically because this kind of policies are flawed in a way. They haven't really thought about this when it comes to trying to provide relief goods and needing proper government ID when not all of the population have government ID. We have a few minutes left. When we return to our breakout room, we would have to have someone to present the results of our discussion. So anyone who wants to do that. So basically, someone would be having a 2-minute presentation, a 2-minute discussion of our breakout room. Can we ask Francisca to do that?
Okay, I can do. That's fine. I can do that. I think I'll just sum it around data and also digital identity point that has been raised, because that's also linked to the issue that I was talking about. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's great. We actually had a rich discussion, no? Particularly on making data more understandable to the general public, make it more inclusive in a way, and how using government information to actually help people, and not just for transparency, accountability measures, but to actually have a practical use in our society to make it better.
Yeah, true. So accessibility and accountability is really vital.
Right, we'll be returning to the main room now for in a bit.
We have a text from Kehinde. It's okay, Kehinde, no problem.
Actually, I just want to return to Sheena Adams
Okay.
in South Africa, wherein they have strong regulatory environment and mechanisms. Um, and this is the same problem as well in many countries, particularly in how they would implement the law. While the law is great in paper, there is really a lot of work to do with in terms of implementation. That's also the same thing with the Philippines. We have a lot of environmental laws, but they're not properly implemented. That's why we have one of the most plastic pollution in Southeast Asia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, by the way, this is Albert from Philippines. Uh, Currently, our government is already a data-driven government. Uh, the biggest problem that what I'm seeing right now is that uh, we do have lack of, data management. But for us to be able to do that, the government should have the capacity to become a, uh, the capacity for digital transformation. Uh, what I mean what I mean about this is that if digital government transformation is, fundamentally about governance transformation and cultural change in support of a, country's overall national development vision and strategy and the achievement of the sustainable development goals. Therefore, it requires a holistic approach that is data driven and value driven, and it should be institutionalized across all levels of government and the society. We can realize it through uh, like iterative process that includes undertaking context and situation analysis, by articulating, for example, a shared vision of government transformation and how digital technologies, for example, will be leveraged to achieve societal goals. Another example is that devising a strategy and a digital government implementation roadmap based on key pillars and putting it in place, monitoring and evaluation mechanism for continuous improvement. Because on this part, this is the lacking part of the Philippine government, the monitoring and evaluation mechanism for continuous improvement. We also need to promote digital inclusion and ensuring that all people, including vulnerable groups, can access new technologies, for example, to improve their well-being, especially these trying times of pandemic. It should put people first and revolve around their needs. Another point is that the government has played a central role in addressing the crisis by becoming an essential element of communication, leadership, and collaboration between policymakers and society during the COVID-19 pandemic. The government also need to give careful consideration to the unintended consequences of technology use and take active steps to protect sensitive data and people's privacy and security. Also, uh, uh, as an analyst, I noticed that the pandemic has shown how critical ICT or information communication technologies can be, when appropriately leveraged for good governance, especially in difficult times like the pandemic. Governments really need to accelerate efforts to embrace technology even when the crisis is over. Uh, for the way forward, I believe that the government uh, have the means to improve public service delivery, increase people engagement, enhance transparency, accountability, and inclusion, and ultimately making life better for all.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Albert. And okay, we're back again in our main room. And at this point, we would be presenting the results of our discussions in our respective breakout rooms. So for breakout room number one, let's have Francisca Chidu from Nigeria.
Hello, everyone. So we looked at the different issues that countries faced during the pandemic, one thing was clear is the issue of data, existing data that could easily make both government and state actors to provide services to citizens, especially during the lockdown, which was very difficult. Like for instance, in Nigeria, where we currently have citizen uprising and protests across the country, more recently having vulnerable people going to loot palliative that were meant to be distributed during the lockdown. So what that means that there are clearly issues, aside it being that the government obviously had challenges in distribution, challenge of distribution in terms of the data to say who are the vulnerable. Do you have the data of the vulnerable people in your community, in your countries? Some countries do not necessarily have the data to say these are the people and within a certain amount of money. Maybe we sometimes get different statistics on this, but this has really not helped. And we also had contribution around the use of countries where they use national identity to be able to provide for citizens, especially services citizens during the pandemic, which also brings us to the discussion around digital identity, which is something that even as civil society actors, we need to, and young people within our countries, we need to start to think how we can drive conversations around digital identity. All over the world, we should be able to have unique number where you know people and how they can easily access services with the identity they have, which I think is lacking in most countries, developing countries. And I believe it's something that we can drive as young people in terms of using technology to support government. Some of us are techies, some of us run civic or gov tech organization. So we can start to think of how we can use our knowledge of technology to support data collection and also implementation of digital identities in countries where you don't currently have that, so, which will help in both national planning and future social security initiatives for countries. And also we had people who, I think in South Africa, where they have
All right.
challenges.
Francisca, can you wrap up our discussion?
Okay, yeah, where you have challenges in terms of having a policy, but you may need the funding and resources to operationalize it. And those are, I think, the key points that we discussed in our group.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisca from Nigeria. Now let's have breakout number 2. Who
Okay.
will be
Yeah, thank you
presenting it?
so
Okay.
much. Thank you so much for that, Yuri. We will, Francois and I will be quick, and
Yeah.
we're not able to assign a speaker. So yeah, when it comes to fostering multi-sector collaboration and advocating for FOI during the pandemic, based on our discussions, we have 4 points. The first two, go ahead, Francois.
Okay, so the first one is what we spoke about is basically making sure that people know what exactly what information they can exactly access and how they can access it. So basically, collaborate with many sectors so that this information is kind of mainstreamed and everyone knows what they have a right to and how they can get to this. And the second point we made was to empower or advocate for the creation of an ombudsman office or an FOI agency regulator. And this is basically to serve as a middle person between the government and citizens so that if citizens feel their rights are being violated, also in terms of access to information, they have someone that they can go to before the government.
Okay. So for the last two, the third one would be about deepening the understanding among FOI advocates as to what is freedom of information. I know it's nice that we have a big network or a big coalition advocating for FOI, but it is also imperative for us to deepen their knowledge about it so they can spark deeper and meaningful conversations with decision makers like lawmakers, those working for the government, major actors in civil society, and multilateral agencies as to what FOI is all about. And then at the same time, the shared goals among advocates. So this links to the number 4, which is within the network of FOI advocates, internal planning and outcomes. So essentially, we want to make sure that we acknowledge that aside from advocating for FOI, we also want to use FOI for the other advocacies that we have, maybe women's rights, LGBT rights, other human rights, or other things that we advocate for, environmental awareness, take for example. So we want to connect those, and making sense and the level of awareness among FOI advocates about it would be planned out if we do internal planning and discussions about it. So yeah, essentially that's for our breakout session. And yeah, just to quickly end this, given that it's already time, we want to invite everyone, and we will be contacting you about the International Youth Movement for Freedom of Information. So this is something that we recently convened, and we want to connect FOI youth advocates from across the world when it comes to making cross-border collaborations when it comes to advocating for freedom of information. So we will be in touch with you on that, and then we will email you and contact you as to follow-up activities and future collaborations that we can do. So all right, thank you so much. Yuri, you can wrap up.
Again, if you want to continue these conversations, you can always email us for partnerships and collaborations. Thank you so much for participating in our session on advocating for freedom of information during the pandemic.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.